really willing to step up to that.
And it's
Okay, so I'm just going to throw out some stuff like performance cognitive, and we can keep on top of the rest of it.
It's either on par or worse, depends on your talk.
Okay, so it's certainly. Do you see any of the
I personally.
people come to primary?
No, take care of houses. Tell me, you see a lot of there.
Right.
So I guess that is there something. I'm sure it's probably here.
Yes. Yeah.
No, it's not.
It's.
It might be the over the chair.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a page from Carmen and I'm going to set part of the time to science. Okay, folks. Round up the conversation here so that Barb can begin. And I think Noelle might want to say a word also, but Barbara Krueger here has been a fantastic contributor to the math program through her service in the graduate teaching assistant program with Joel, right, a few years ago, and also in her development of educational curriculum materials related to climate change. And hopefully she'll be able to extend that contribution in the regional community if she stays here in Arizona for a while, which we hope.
Thanks, Nina. Like I said, I'm going to take a page from Carmen and jump up and down because I find that to be a little bit more comfortable, and I hate standing way up here when you're all relaxed and sitting down. So what I decided to do for our thesis project was take a look at the intersection of climate change. I won't say science, I would say climate change issues, because it goes beyond the science. But look at it within an ethical framework. And then in application in an undergraduate course, use eco-criticism as kind of a way to present certain issues. So, and I understand a lot of people don't know what eco-criticism is, and I'll get to that in a second. So it's an ethical construct and an eco-critical sort of methodology. So you probably all noticed, and I understand a lot of this material I'm kind of like preaching to, or maybe even singing with the choir here. In the global north, we've kind of been a little bit slow on moving on climate action for a number of reasons. And these are some of them. We're facing an unprecedented risk. It's an invisible risk. We don't necessarily have all of the pieces of the puzzle in place. And because of this, there are a lot of challenges on how to communicate climate risk, and we very often become overwhelmed by the amount of information that we receive regarding climate. All of these agencies are always kind of competing for our time and attention to give us information and ask us for money and all of those things. So for some of us, we've become very fatalistic about it, and that's not a good thing, because when you are so overwhelmed by the prospect of potential global catastrophe, sometimes you step away and say, there's just nothing I can do about this, and I'm just going to work in my own little corner, and there we are. And they even have a name for this now. There was a study that came out, believe it or not, funded by the National Wildlife Fund fund a couple of years ago. And one of the lead authors identified this anxiety, this extreme sense of, I can't do anything about this, and I'm so upset I'm going to crawl into a hole. And it's called PTSD. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder, it's pre-traumatic stress disorder, where we are so filled with anxious and anxiety over something that we're waiting to have happen to us, waiting for that other shoe to drop. I don't have to tell you about the opposition that is just so powerful, especially in the United States right now. And you all know who they are. They are big oil and big coal, and they've got deep pockets, and they've got political backing, and they are not going to go away. They're here to fight a long fight. And so we have to deal with that too. And then there's the idea of scientific communication of risk versus scientific consensus, and they're two different things. The way that scientists communicate climate risk is not terribly well understood by most of the public. So it leaves us with a sense of, maybe they're really not too sure about X, Y, and Z. The problem with that is the overwhelming scientific consensus on anthropogenic climate change is what it is. But that bit of the conversation tends to get lost in the shuffle. Another issue is that we haven't taken a long view. We haven't looked down the road and said, these are issues that we need to present with a long-range plan that will instill in the population that there is a growing movement. And then lastly, and what's probably informed my work the most, is there hasn't been a values conversation about climate change. And I'm starting with the word values because if I came out and said virtue, people would get up and leave the room, because if you say the word virtue to certain audiences, they think of Socrates and Plato, and you don't want a lecture on philosophy right now, I'm sure. And it's one slide, I promise. So there's a lot of research recently in the field of what's called moral psychology, and it's actually starting to show us why so many people lack strong moral intuition regarding climate change. And you may or may not have heard about what a moral judgment system is, something that goes on in our brains. And it consists of very important cognitive, emotional, social, and motivational mechanisms in our brains that go on that basically tell us what's right and what's wrong. So some of this work has actually been used in climate change issues, and these two researchers, Ezra Markowitz and Azim Sharif, wrote a paper a couple of years ago at the University of Oregon, and I've actually had the privilege to be able to communicate with Dr. Markowitz. And this is what they came up with, this list of why they think most of us have not engaged with climate change as a moral imperative. For most people, it's just out there. It's complex, it's distant, and it's abstract. Combine that with how the moral judgment system works, and you've got some other issues. That system in our brain is actually just really tuned to recognize only certain types of moral transgressions, if you will. And they generally have to do with an identifiable perpetrator as well, and the intent to harm an identifiable victim. There are a number of authors that have come to the conclusion that climate change just doesn't fit that model whatsoever. The victims of climate change tend to be far away from us spatially and temporally. Some of them haven't even been born yet. And the other part of that is we sort of recognize the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as a side effect of modern living on this planet, and not anything that any of us, individually or collectively, have done to cause harm to anybody. Another problem that they decided was an issue here is that Americans are, especially, and other people in the West or the global North, we're exposed to a lot of messages that pretty much blame us for causing climate change. Uncertainty, and I'm not talking about scientific consensus or anything like that, uncertainty in the timing of future climate change events makes us think that, okay, that's not so bad right now, and we're doing okay, so this rose-colored glasses on, and that makes us avoid doing anything about the problem because, well, we've got time. Another problem is that the climate change victims are, once again, far away from us in space and time, and for that reason we look at them as out-group members. And they, in that sense, because they're not in our tribe, they generally don't command the same kind of moral consideration that we would give members of our tribe. What little moral framing there does exist targets only a small percentage of moral values, and this, the authors found, really only applies to tree-hugging political liberals. That kind of sets off a few bells and whistles, whereas the wider population, it doesn't do that. And they also feel that these issues have an awful lot to do with the current political polarization we're enjoying in Washington right now, especially after the elections at the beginning of November. Our perception of climate change is influenced by a ton of other factors, and it can have anything to do with how they are treated in the media, what media outlets we choose to view. I mean, our presents issues on climate change much than Fox News does. Our own educations, it has to do with our worldviews, it has to do with religious convictions, and even has to do with our impression of local weather events. And a good example of that would be the polar vortices this winter, and all of a sudden everyone's saying global warming. Not here. Okay, so the next slide. That's an interesting slide that kind of got messed up. Dr. Markowitz and his colleagues have some suggestions in climate change communication. And what they're saying is that we need to engage a full range of moral values, and we need to focus messages on the burdens that can be avoided by acting on climate change, not the positive benefits, and which is kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, but what they found is that avoiding the sense of avoiding burdens is more powerfully, it's a better motivator for us to react than addressing positive benefits. So they're saying we should motivate action through messages that generate positive emotional responses. We should try and help people see that there is hope, that there's joy, that, you know, all of the good things in life, and not appeal to their sense of guilt or shame or anxiety. I mean, that's what we've got mothers for. We should also avoid linking action on climate change to extrinsic motives. for instance, economic gain. Because that is also less powerfully motivating, and it sort of robs us of our ability to have a personal, intrinsic reaction and motivation towards climate action. One of the last ones is bring those faraway victims back in, and one of the ways we can do this is identify common values and goals that those victims would share with us. And there is a number 6, and that probably is, I don't know what happened to that slide, it was fine earlier. Okay, I said I wasn't going to talk about ethics, but I'm just going to do a tiny little bit just to give you, if you haven't had a course in philosophy, this can be kind of tough to understand. In ethics, there are basically 3 paths you can go down to arrive at some conclusions. The first group of theories are consequentialists, and they basically are the moral arguments on consequences of acting or failing to act. And if you've studied Jeremy Bentham, the theory of utilitarianism, which is basically most good, least harm. That's consequentialist. Deontologic theories are moral arguments based on doing what is right, and they tell us what we're allowed to do, what we should do, and what we cannot do. So that it's pretty much duty-based ethical theory. Immanuel Kant, the categorical imperative, the BCI, that's deontic theory. So we know that ethics is certainly about how we should act in the world, but it's also about who we should be as people. And that's the emphasis and the beauty of virtue theories. They're on being rather than doing.
Could you give an example of that?
Of
Well, someone who would manifest ethics, virtue in terms of being.
in terms of being. Okay, here's a perfect example. Well, there are lots of perfect, good examples. Take a virtue, say, bravery. Okay, and I'm actually going to do this. It's good, and I like to use bravery because it's something that I struggle with. If you were to choose a Disney character and apply it to me, I'd be Piglet. Okay, a very small animal who's afraid of everything. Okay, virtues, you can look at them at this wonderful way that a virtue sits on a continuum, a spectrum, if you will, and you can bookend them with, guess what? What's the opposite of virtue? Vice. Okay. Well, there are 2 vices that show a lack of bravery. On the one hand, we have cowardice. Okay, that's Piglet. At the other end, we have foolhardiness. Thanks. I did not prompt her. I promise. Foolhardiness. So, one of the great things about virtue theory is, as opposed to consequentialist or deontic theory, is that you can kind of choose, depending on a whole lot of other things that are going on in your life, where along this continuum you are and where you might want to move to. So I've spent a whole lot of my life kind of being down here someplace, and I'm always working towards here. You never fail at this. No one can say F on virtue. You may miss the mark, but you can come back and try again. And that's the beauty of virtue. I answer your question? Thank you. Okay. I love that example. Okay. Oh, this is really awful. Okay, so there are a school of folks who are called environmental virtue ethicists. And environmental virtue ethics, EVE, kind of decided a while ago that virtue theory is best in application for environmental problems. And these are the reasons why. Up here with Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant, they're all about humans. They're all about how we respond to each other. And there's nowhere in here that talks about anything that isn't non-human, an organism or a system. So that's basically why environmental virtue ethicists look at virtue theory, because they define specific character traits that can be applied to everything from climate adaptation and mitigation, as well as, in the bottom of that slide, says sustainable living. So, this is what we came up with, and I used ideas from lots of environmental virtue ethicists, from Luke Van Winsveen to Ron Sandler, Mike Hume, who I've corresponded with a couple of times, and I came up with this very long list, this is 3 slides, of virtues or virtuous dispositions, because some words don't lend themselves well to virtue, per se, that we can specifically apply in climate change issues. And I don't tend to like to do this because I like to keep it very positive, but I also came up with corresponding vices or vicious dispositions that sort of correspond. The list is kind of long. So, as you're looking through these, if you have any questions, please let me know. Benevolence is an environmental virtue that a fellow over at the University of Nevada in Reno came up with. His name is Jeffrey Frazen. He's written a couple of papers, and once again, I kind of checked in with him a couple of times. He actually broke down this virtue into what he called complementary virtues. So what he's saying is, for instance, benevolence is actually made up of all of these other things. I took the vices and decided that miserliness was probably a vicious disposition, sort of opposite benevolence, and then came up with the complementary. Sounds like that should be a virtue, not a vice, that go along with miserliness. Okay, next slide. Sorry. This is the last group. Catherine Norlock came up with forgivingness, which I think is in a world that is so lacking in peace right now. She described forgivingness as a combination of the virtues of not only reconciliation but also recommitment to the issue that two people, 2 countries might have been arguing about. Does everyone know enough Greek to know what pleonexia and akrasia are? Okay. Pleonexia is sort of gluttony on steroids. It's conspicuous consumption. It's covetousness to the extreme, to wanting to acquire things just because you want to acquire them. It's buying a lot of stuff and then renting a storage space to put all your stuff in. Akrasia, weakness is not a good definition. Akrasia is really an inability to act in your own best interest. So it covers things like procrastination, It covers things like any kind of addictive behavior. So what I did was I combined, in some cases, several of my climate change virtues and then paired them with topics for readings and discussions in the classroom. And this sounds terrible. For instance, trust and faith, and to kind of make us look at language that we can apply to discussion of how climate change is treated in the media. Imagination, climate change and technology. Maybe you'd want to talk about geoengineering and that kind of discussion. So then I started to look at how do you engage people in this process, and I turned to Martha Nussbaum, who is at the University of Chicago, and some of her theories about morality and emotion. And what she determined was that emotions sort of figure into morality because they can help you either act or at least make a decision about certain things. And they also involve the interpretation and the belief that something has actually happened. Basically what she says is that moral wisdom involves sensitivity, perception, and imagination, which is another important piece of this, because what else in our existence also involves a sensitivity to it, perception, and the imagination. We're looking at maybe a field in the humanities. Well, I took it to mean art. So this is sort of my next piece. This is where eco-criticism comes in. It's basically the study of any type of art, whether it's literary or audio, visual, and how it is treated or how it treats the environment. So eco-critics look at the various ways how the medium either treats the environment broadly, or how the subjects within the environment appear. You can go to the next slide. Originally, eco-critics, and the field is not all that old, it really sort of congealed maybe in the mid-1990s with Cheryl Glockfeldy and Harold Fromm, Lawrence Buell. And what they basically did is they applied it to literature. And they looked at all kinds of literature, but mostly the nature writers we all know and love. Rachel Carson and John Muir and Aldo Leopold, Terry Tempest Williams. I mean, you could come up with your own list. So I'd like you to take a minute to read this quote from Wild Bull by John Muir and see if you can identify some of the virtue language that he chose to use. Anybody have any thoughts on this? In virtue language, what would you say he's trying to tell us?
There's something about right understanding, which is that right wrong mentality, that
optics. I think he was making, it's good that you picked that out, Carmen. He already was coming from the viewpoint that there is a right understanding, which is the thing about who John Ware is. Anyone else? That's a good point. I didn't even actually think about that. Right, wrong? Anyone else? This word in particular jumps out at me. Okay. Go to the next slide. No, where is he?
Maybe no.
No, he's not here. Okay.
We know when
Yeah,
And I've actually used the Lorax as a teaching tool with an undergraduate classroom.
with kids.
I've done it with adults, and it's equally as awesome. But children's literature, my point with using him as an example, children's literature is full of examples of virtuous language. And if you think about Aesop's fables, or all of the fairy tales that we listen to, and stories that we, even Charlotte's Web that we read about in grammar school, children's literature is a wealth of information that we can use in classroom. Okay, yes, there really is something called eco-cinema, and this is a scene from Day After Tomorrow. Yeah, they didn't really get the science right, but, and these are obvious. There are other examples that aren't as obvious. This is An Inconvenient Truth, a documentary based on the book by Al Gore. There was a picture, no, I think I took that slide out actually. There was a picture of the scene from Bambi here originally, and I took it out. You could even use Bambi or Happy Feet to illustrate some climate change virtue. Anyway, this is not climate change. Anyone recognize the scene from this movie? Lorraine Bracco, whose accent irritates the heck out of me, but I use this anyway in a classroom. Sean Connery.
Medicine from the Forest, I don't remember the name.
Medicine Man, and it was a great illustration of biodiversity loss. Okay, next slide. Okay, my photos
Because
are
we're also
gone.
squished, that's why we're squishing your screen so much with these stuff. Sorry.
Okay. Edward Bertinsky is a very famous eco-photographer. And the two photographs that I chose to use were actually, one was a gorgeous is the wrong word, a well-photographed picture from the Gulf oil spill in 2010. Profound representation of what actually was going on. The other one, nickel tailings from Ontario, actually looks like a bright crimson red river that showed tailings from a mine site in Ontario. Next one, maybe more. Okay, good. Popular novels. A lot of them out in paperback right now, and they even have their own genre now. They're called Cli-Fi. And they range from Margaret Atwood's, her sort of futuristic dystopia, post-climate change catastrophe, Oryx and Crake, to Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior, which takes place in modern times. And it's based on, I won't give away the ending, you really have to read it. It was a beautifully written novel, based on shifting climate patterns that were causing issues with the flight patterns of monarch butterflies. That's all I'm saying about that. You have to read it. Okay, so that's Cli-Fi.
Are all of them depressing? I mean, I've only read Crick and Alex. I mean, it's so depressing. Pretty much.
Yeah, so there is,
Just point out that.
well, one of the things you have to do is also can't really look at the positive side, but it's still getting some information out there, and more in some of these novels, more so in the theater pieces that are out there. It's called docu-science, so it's presenting the science of climate change in a more palatable way. So this is totally unrelated to climate change, but I had to bring it in because it was a piece of information I was astounded to learn. In the final of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the tonality as it begins, and it kind of slides in from the end of the fourth movement, using a C major chord, C, E, G, with an F. And there was a researcher, a geographer in 1870-something, his name was Albert Klein, who determined that that particular tonality is exactly the same sound that waterfalls make. And even though by 1808, Beethoven, if you recall, was stoned deaf by the time he died, so we can kind of assume that in 1808 he was still losing his hearing. He somehow knew that this thing in nature would work. So that's another way you can look at something eco-critically. It has nothing to do with modern environmental issues whatsoever, and I just had to use that. And I would have loved to give the musical example, except we'd run out of time. Traditional English landscape art also can be viewed eco-critically, and yes, it says Irish. Yeah, Barrett was actually an Irishman, but he did most of his work in England. Okay, eco-drama. It's more prevalent in the United Kingdom than it is here. This is kind of a combination ballet theater-like show called Ecocentric, a combination of two plays by Steve Waters, and you probably can't see this well enough to know, but this is a modern representation of William Shakespeare, Midsummer's Night Dream, where the setting is everything about that. And one of the other things I forgot to mention early was eco-critics are now going not only forward, they're also going backwards into literary time to evaluate texts through an eco-critical lens, including works like the Bible and William Shakespeare. Okay, so another missing photos. Edith Musnier does nature installations that are enormous. She works in ribbon, and these were two of her works, and the last one probably isn't going to come up either. And if anyone got down to Phoenix over the last, well, his first or his last installation down at the Desert Botanical Garden.
He just lived in Mertown.
Did you see him? Gotta go. He does enormous glass installations. Those were my last examples of eco-critical art per se. And what I would like you to do now is maybe form pairs, and I'm going to let you become eco-critics. And I have some examples. Some are cartoons, some are poems, and what I'd like you to do is look for virtue language. And so we don't have to go back to my slides. There are 3 in each packet. So I didn't know how big the group would be. My list of virtues and vices are on the front. So I'm going to make sure that you know this one. This is a good one. This is actually haiku that was written based on the last IPCC report. This one I love. This is cartoons. You guys are going to get that so easy. Song lyrics. This is an excerpt from Carlson Pina. You'll love this.
That are representative of one or the other.
Certainly look at vicious language if you want to. We're trying to keep it positive. And
Yeah.
it may be pretty subtle. But it can also be your reaction to work too. It doesn't have to be a medication.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Justice.
That's actuality. That's
Like the politicians.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I would say brings us to beyond the word.
I actually was here Thursday and it was fine. It was fine. Of course, I was doing it on my computer and not yours.
Yeah, right. Let's hope about it. Dream, feel the
Very good.
You know what, Carmen, you are totally so allowed to be brain fried on your side.
But
Your ability to refrain.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right with it. Unless they
His idea is great.
cozy,
Yeah. Everyone we get brain. Weirdness in some way. It's like different ways are everyone's on the spectrum. Yeah.
So we are these. Talk about existentials.
I'll be happy to.
Or you might be already. No, it's a good team too.
Yeah.
Oh, so there you go.
We start. They're going to be generous.
So, does anyone have any reflections about what they were just looking at? Anyone want to comment or raise a question? Because I think we are running out of time.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are sort of free. Assessments. These two are small ones. So it's sort of an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Great. Great.
Which is actually
Just
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. A do-over.
It's just like,
Yeah, let's try and get rid of
Yeah,
this.
it's at least, you know, right.
Yeah.
So,
You know, I struggle with that.
otherwise, absolutely experience.
Right. Yeah.
It's a message.
Yeah. You give them a chance to refocus.
well, I just think that's what this is training class. This is showing. Pressing. There.
They do that on the baby.
Mhm.
It's kind of like legislative process.
Right, right.
Mitigate crash.
Right.
Yeah.
We're working with it.
The other side is
Right.
Exactly.
You know, so it
What
might
do you see, what do you know about
positive way to actually working with what we don't have. Like show that, oh, we still have
And the challenge is to, at the same time, make an excuse to not do it.
Right,
Which is
right.
Sometimes you have to look hard.
Someone come up with something, I'm sure come up with.
Uh-huh.
That's not instruction.
Right, right.
We're
So
trying hard.
that's the challenge, the danger versus, slippery slope.
It is.
No, I'm not gonna say, someone else will figure it
Uh-huh.
Remember, it's not
out. Think slow tsunami.
Right.
At least get
And-
the little swings. Right, and that is virtuous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Modifying that.
Good question, so, like peers advice? Some vicious disposition, and also because along the same kind
To the voters
spectrum, having a healthy peer is a good thing. The kind of peer that I talked about earlier was allies. That sense of neighbors and that kind of fear, that kind of vicious, because it makes us think.
We're saying no looks like.
I think that's very well.
I wouldn't say it.
Yes, it is. Okay, so this is an appropriate process. If you were going to maybe start and describe a vicious disposition that opposing her how would you describe it? No, it's a great question.
No, it was one that was.
Watched it.
That's a great point. That is really good. I really greatly appreciate that. In order to wrap up here, does anyone have any questions or comments? Does anyone want to make any statements about what they just evaluated?
We all had the same thing. We had Carl Safina, moral climate, and really he gets right to it in the first sentence, and it's really kind of encapsulates what he was describing, which is of all the psychopathology and climate issue, the most counterproductive thought is solving the problem will require sacrifice. So we have to give up something in order to have a change. And what he described in this is that actually doesn't really serve interests often, because then you're putting people in positions to weigh the goods or the bad, so to speak. And so for us, we thought that was a really powerful piece. And then we also applied it to real-world settings. Like for instance, a school looking to create a new building. Would the school want to leave building? Yeah, probably. well, what kind of sacrifice do you have to have in order to have this lead building? And so those are real world issues that is a leader of a school going to go for the lead building but sacrifice teacher pay to have that? Probably not in most cases. So
Anybody else? Anyone have any other questions? I think we're probably about time.
So, just a couple of other questions. It seems like getting to, this something has a lot of depth, I think, the research that you've done. And looking at that in your own situation, like where do you, we found ourselves doing shorthand, the right side or the left side. And do you fall over on the right side? And is there any usefulness for being on the right side? So in that quote there, he actually said, know what sacrifice is losing trees and losing species, what sacrifice is having polluted water, and what sacrifice. So he still kind of beat us up a little bit about it, but it was effective. So it brought up for us, is there ever a time when you drift over to that side, to the dark side? And because, you know, you think it's an effective way to get something across. Oh, or does the means justify the end?
That's exactly what I was just gonna say, and it's always about that, right? Most people don't even realize we're already sacrificing. I think he even says it in that excerpt, what we're actually sacrificing are our children's futures.
Right.
So at what price do we?
Does he end with positive though?
I'm sorry?
Does he end with
He
positive?
ends with how he does the hamburger models and stuff.
He's a rancher.
Okay.
So yeah, he starts out good, kind of good, but questioning. He goes into, this is what we're sacrificing, which are, you know, all these terrible things that are happening to us in our environment. And he ends with a hopefulness.
I almost feel that might be more effective. Like, I don't know, in my experience, having something that's like, this is what's happening, it's terrible, but then there's this hope. So it drives you more to take action maybe towards the positive than just seeing it all as potentially positive. I don't know if that makes sense.
And that's one of the things that's so difficult with climate change education, is because there are so many negatives, and it's very often so difficult to see the hopeful side, to see the upside, to be able to reach beyond the doom and gloom of the science.
But you can't do one without the other, I feel like. Because a lot of classes will be like, the doom and gloom is the first 3 to 6 weeks or something, and by that point you're checked out and you're like, well, we're all gonna die. It's not worth saving. Right?
Check that same thing out for all your programs. So Melanie and I taught a course on climate change education. How many you don't raise your hand, but just think about your own program. Climate change education, oh, that'd be cool, but I don't have time for that, right? I don't have time, I don't really fit in my program. And that was part of what you were saying, it's too hard to get, you know, it doesn't really relate to me and what I'm doing. So, I do recycle, you know, or whatever. So I think it happens, but sometimes we're in a bubble, we think, oh, but we're together. But you bring it down to the everyday, you go, oops, maybe not so much. Maybe I need to embrace this in a deeper way.
It's a good way of putting it. Thank you. Okay.
Good job. Thank you.
Do you want your teachers back? You may keep them if you wish. You may recycle them or